Hey guys, tonight we drift softly into the mysteries of ancient Egypt's lost language. A language carved into stone and whispered onto fragile papyrus. A language that slept beneath sand and silence for thousands of years. Settle in wherever you are, perhaps under a dim light, perhaps with the world already quiet around you. If you enjoy these slow journeys through time, like and subscribe, and leave a gentle comment telling where you are listening from and what hour the night has reached there. There is no rush. Let the day loosen its grip. Let the breath slow. Tonight we follow the Nile not with our feet, but with our words, drifting into the calm and patient world of hieroglyphs, of signs that were never meant to shout, only to endure. Imagine moonlight touching temple walls, the air cool at last after a desert day, and the soft rasp of a chisel against limestone. Imagine a scribe bending low, reed brush dipped in black ink that smells faintly of soot and water, his hand steady, his mind trained to remember shapes older than kings. This language was not only read, it was felt. It carried prayers, names, jokes, insults, spells, grocery lists, and the longings of people who never imagined we would one day try to listen as they slept. Tonight we decode its hidden meanings, slowly, gently, without forcing anything awake. We let the symbols come to us as they once came to those who lived beside the river, patient as the current, repeating as the seasons. The lost language of ancient Egypt does not return all at once. It arrives like dawn, pale and quiet, and that is how we will meet it. Long before alphabets marched in tidy lines, before letters forgot their pictures, the Nile Valley gave birth to writing that still feels alive. The earliest Egyptian signs emerged around the end of the 4th millennium BCE, at a time when villages were becoming towns and memory alone was no longer enough. Grain had to be counted, offerings had to be recorded, names had to be fixed so they could not drift away like smoke. These first marks were simple, almost shy. A jar meant a jar. A bird meant a bird. But even then, beneath their simplicity, a deeper intention rested. To write something was to make it real. To carve a name was to give it breath beyond death. The Egyptians never truly separated language from existence itself. A word was not a label. It was a force. When a scribe painted the sign for water, those rippling lines were not merely water. They were water's essence, its coolness, its promise of life. This belief shaped everything that followed. Hieroglyphs became sacred not because priests declared them so, but because they worked. They held the world together. As dynasties rose and fell, the script grew more complex, more playful, more precise. By the time the old kingdom pyramids lifted their pale shoulders above the desert, writing had become an art practiced by a small, trained class. To be a scribe was to escape the backbreaking labor of fields and quarries. Texts from the period speak with gentle humor about this. The scribe sits in shade while others sweat. He holds knowledge, and knowledge feeds him. Yet the signs he mastered were demanding. Hundreds of symbols, each with multiple lives. A single owl could be an owl, or the sound M, or the idea of night, or a silent marker guiding the reader's understanding. This layered nature is what made the language so rich, and what later made it seem so impossible to recover. The Egyptians never thought of this as confusion. To them it was harmony. The world itself was layered. Why should words be any different? Deep inside the pyramids of Unas and Teti, carved into walls meant never to see sunlight again, are the pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings in human history. These are not narratives. They are murmurs, spells and utterances meant to guide a dead king through the afterlife. The language here is dense, compressed, and powerful. A single line might invoke stars, birds, ladders, and fire, all at once. The hieroglyphs twist meaning together like strands of linen. When the sign of a star appears, it is not decoration. It is destiny. Kings hoped to become imperishable stars, circling the sky forever. The words carved around them were tools to make that transformation happen. Reading these texts today, slowly, sign by sign, one senses the weight of belief pressing into the stone. This was language meant to last longer than flesh. But hieroglyphs were never only for kings and gods. As time moved on, writing slipped from temple walls into daily life. To keep up with the needs of administration, Egyptians developed cursive forms of the script. Hieratic first, flowing and swift, written with brush on papyrus. Later demotic, even more streamlined, almost restless in its curves. These scripts carried contracts, letters, receipts, gossip, and complaints. A man writes to his superior begging for grain. A woman dictates a letter to her son, scolding him gently for neglect. The language here is practical, sometimes weary, sometimes sharp, and yet it remains tied to the sacred signs. Even demotic, which looks almost nothing like a bird or a snake, still descends from those original images. The sacred never fully let go of the everyday. There is a quiet humor hidden in Egyptian writing that only reveals itself. When one listens carefully, scribes loved puns. They played with sound and image. A goose could stand for the sound saw, but it also evoked the god Geb, whose sacred animal it was. To write a divine name with a certain bird was to hint at layers of myth without spelling them out. Royal names were especially guarded. Kings enclosed their names in cartouches, loops of rope that symbolically protected the identity inside. To erase a name was to kill a person a second time. This is why later rulers sometimes chiseled out the cartouches of their rivals. Language was power, and power could be attacked through language. As centuries passed, foreign rulers arrived. Libyans, Nubians, Persians, Greeks, Romans. Each brought their own tongues, but the old script lingered. Temples continued to carve hieroglyphs long after they ceased to be spoken aloud. By the Roman period, few could truly read them. They were copied, imitated, revered, but not understood. The signs became symbols of mystery even to the people who lived among them. When the last hieroglyphic inscription was carved at Philae in the 4th century CE, it was done almost by memory, a ritual rather than a conversation. Then, slowly, the knowledge slipped away. For more than 1,000 years, the language slept. Travelers gazed at the walls and guessed wildly. Some thought hieroglyphs were pure symbols, philosophical ideas frozen in stone. Others imagined secret wisdom encoded for the initiated. The truth was both simpler and more beautiful. The signs spoke sound as well as sense, but without the key, no one could hear them. That key lay buried in chance. In 1799, during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, soldiers repairing a fort found a dark slab of stone, the Rosetta Stone. Its surface carried the same decree written 3 times in hieroglyphs, demotic, and Greek. The past held out its hand. The work of decoding was slow, careful, almost meditative. Scholars compared signs, counted repetitions, listened for echoes. Thomas Young noticed patterns. Jean-Francois Champollion felt something deeper. He knew Coptic, the last descendant of ancient Egyptians still used in church liturgy. When he matched hieroglyphic signs to Coptic sounds, the stone began to speak. The moment of realization is famous. Champollion is said to have run to his brother and collapsed, overwhelmed. After centuries of silence, the language breathed again. Yet even now, full understanding remains gentle, incomplete. New readings refine old ones. Meanings shift slightly, like sand underfoot. And that is fitting. This language was never meant to be pinned down harshly. It was meant to flow, to repeat, to endure. Tonight we have only begun to drift into its currents. We have listened to the stone clear its throat. In the next part, we will move deeper into the specific signs themselves, into birds and eyes and hands that speak without moving. For now, let the symbols fade softly behind your eyelids, glowing faintly like stars over the desert. The night deepens now, and the river continues to flow without sound. In this quieter hour, we drift closer to the signs themselves, no longer seeing them as a distant wall of symbols, but as individual presences, each with its own history, weight, and intention. Imagine a temple corridor where torches once flickered, their light brushing against carved birds, eyes, hands, and reeds. These were not chosen at random. Each sign was selected with care, with memory, with an understanding that the world could be reduced to forms, and that those forms could be coaxed into speech. One of the most familiar hieroglyphs is the eye, often called the Eye of Horus, calm, watching. Hold it appears in religious texts, medical papyri, and funerary spells. To the Egyptians, this eye was more than vision. It was completeness, healing, protection. When scribes used it as a word, it could mean sight. When they used it as a symbol, it could mean well-being. And sometimes it did both at once. This was the beauty of their writing. It did not force a single meaning. It allowed meanings to overlap, to rest on each other like layers of linen wrapping a body for eternity. Birds appear everywhere in Egyptian writing. The vulture, the falcon, the owl, the quail chick, each one carried sound, but also character. The falcon was Horus, sky and kingship. The vulture was Mut, mother and protector. The owl, with its wide, unblinking eyes, stood for the sound but it also whispered of night, of silence, of wisdom that watches without speaking. When these birds were carved, their beaks and feathers were rendered with care, because to damage a sign was to weaken its power. In some tombs, potentially dangerous animals were carved without legs, so they could not harm the deceased in the afterlife. Even in writing, the Egyptians were cautious. Hands appear often too. An open hand meant giving. A clenched hand meant grasping. A hand to the mouth meant eating, or sometimes speaking. These gestures feel familiar. almost modern, because they rise from the body itself. The Egyptians understood that language begins in movement. Before sound, there is action. Writing preserved that action long after the hand itself had turned to dust. Water is written as a series of gentle, zigzag lines. It is one of the most ancient signs, simple and enduring. It carried the sound in, but it also always remained water, cool, necessary, alive. When it appears in names and prayers, it brings the Nile with it, quietly flooding the text with life. Without water, there is no Egypt. Without this sign, the language would feel dry, incomplete. Some signs were never meant to be read aloud at all. These are the determinatives, silent guides placed at the end of words to clarify meaning. A little seated man might tell you the word is about a person. A rolled papyrus might tell you it is abstract, an idea rather than a thing. A god figure with a beard tells you the word belongs to the divine. These signs do not speak, but they listen. They ensure the reader walks the correct path through meaning. It is a gentle system, guiding rather than commanding. Royal names were treated with particular care. When a king's name was written, it was often followed by the determinative of a seated god, even if the king was mortal. Language reinforced ideology. The king was divine because the writing said he was. To read his name was to acknowledge his role in maintaining Mot, the balance of the universe. When later kings erased earlier names, they were not vandalizing art. They were rewriting reality. As we move through time, the language shifts subtly. Middle Egyptian becomes the classical form, taught and copied long after it ceased to be spoken. It becomes the Latin of Egypt, a sacred standard. Even when people spoke differently, they wrote in this older tongue because it carried authority. This tells us something quiet and profound. Writing does not always reflect speech. Sometimes it reflects longing, a desire to stay connected to a golden age, the Book of the Dead, better called the Book of Going Forth by Day, is filled with this classical language. Its spells were personalized, names inserted, titles adjusted. No two copies are exactly the same. The language here is reassuring, repetitive, almost hypnotic. The same phrases return again and again, like a lullaby meant to calm the soul as it navigates judgment halls and reed fields. To read these spells slowly is to feel their intended effect. They are meant to soothe fear. They are meant to remind the dead of who they are. Humor survives even here. In love poems written on papyrus, metaphors bloom. A beloved is compared to a lotus, to sweet beer, to a garden in flood. The language becomes playful, intimate. Hieroglyphs that once carved eternity now carry flirtation and longing. This range tells us the script was never cold or distant. It was flexible enough to hold both cosmic order and human desire. As Greek and then Roman rule settled over Egypt, the old language bent but did not break. Greek letters began to write Egyptian sounds, creating Coptic. In Coptic texts, we hear the last echo of the ancient tongue spoken aloud. Vowels appear clearly now. The language feels closer, warmer, and yet the old hieroglyphs remain in the background, like ancestors watching quietly. When the final temples closed, and the old gods fell silent. The script lost its last readers. But it did not vanish. It waited. In stone, in sand, in shadow, tonight, as we rest among these signs, we sense that waiting, the patience of a language that knew time would turn again. In the next part, we will drift further into the lives of the scribes themselves, into their training, their mistakes, their pride, and their quiet jokes left in margins. For now, let the birds fold their wings. Let the water signs ripple gently into stillness, and let the eye close, whole and unbroken. The river is slower here, wider, darker, and in this stretch of night, we move away from the signs and toward the hands that made them. The scribes, quiet figures, seated cross-legged on cool stone floors, reed pens resting between careful fingers, eyes trained to see the world not as chaos, but as order waiting to be shaped. To understand the lost language of ancient Egypt fully, we must sit beside these scribes and breathe at their pace, because language for them was not talent. It was discipline, memory, and devotion. A boy did not become a scribe by accident. He was chosen early, often by his family, sometimes by circumstance, and sent to a place of instruction that smelled of ink, dust, and old papyrus, the house of life, a name both poetic and precise. Here, words were born, copied, preserved, and corrected. Training was slow and repetitive, intentionally so. Students copied the same signs again and again until the wrist remembered what the mind no longer had to command. Owls, water lines, folded cloth, seated men. Over and over, mistakes were corrected sharply. Some practiced tablets still survive, and they show crossed-out signs, rewritten words, marginal notes from teachers who were not always gentle. Discipline mattered because errors were dangerous. A single misplaced sign could change meaning entirely in magical texts. This was especially serious. A wrongly written spell might fail, or worse, misfire. Language was not neutral. It acted. The scribes learned lists first. Lists of signs, lists of words, lists of kings, lists of gods. These lists formed a mental map of the universe as the Egyptians understood it. To know the correct order of kings was to understand time itself. To know the correct epithets of a god was to approach that god safely. Writing was a form of respect. When a scribe finally mastered hieroglyphs, he also mastered restraint. Not every sign was used all the time. Choices mattered. Formal inscriptions demanded balance and beauty. Signs were arranged not only by sound, but by visual harmony. If a tall sign appeared on one side, another tall sign might balance it on the other. Words became architecture. This is why hieroglyphic texts feel composed rather than written. They were designed to be seen as much as read. In quieter moments, scribes allowed themselves small freedoms. On a straka, broken pieces of pottery used for notes and practice, we find jokes, caricatures, even complaints. A scribe sketches an animal acting like a human. A cat serves a mouse. A lion plays a board game. These drawings mirror the written puns of the language itself. Humor was not separate from literacy. It grew out of it. To know the rules well enough was to bend them gently. Letters between scribes reveal a world of rivalry and pride. One scribe mocks another's handwriting. Another boasts of his skill and education. These voices feel close, familiar. The language here is informal, efficient, alive. Hieratic script flows quickly, shaped by speed rather than monumentality. Yet even here, tradition anchors expression. Certain phrases appear again and again. Polite formulas that open and close. Letters like ritual gestures. Language creates social order as much as it conveys information. Errors sometimes slipped into stone itself. A carver might misunderstand a copied text. A sign might be reversed or omitted. In some temples, corrections were carved later, squeezed awkwardly into remaining space. These moments remind us that writing was done by humans, not abstractions. Stone was unforgiving, but human attention wandered. The Egyptians accepted this quietly. Perfection was an ideal, not a constant reality. The scribes' relationship with time was unusual. They copied texts written centuries before their own lives, preserving spellings and grammatical forms no longer spoken. This created a layered language, one that existed partly in the present, partly in the past. When a scribe wrote Middle Egyptian during the New Kingdom, he was speaking with ancestors. Writing became a bridge across generations. This is why the language survived so long after speech changed. Spoken Egyptian evolved naturally, as all languages do. Writing resisted that change. It held, fast to forms sanctified by age. This resistance is what later confused Greek and Roman observers. They saw signs that did not match sounds they heard. They assumed mystery where there was continuity. In temple inscriptions of the later periods, hieroglyphs become increasingly elaborate. Signs multiply, rare variants appear. The script turns inward, speaking primarily to those already initiated. Writing becomes identity. To carve hieroglyphs was to declare loyalty to tradition in a changing world. As Christianity spread and temples closed, scribes disappeared. The last houses of life fell silent. The last hands trained to read the old signs grew still. Yet their work remained. Waiting without urgency, stone does not hurry. Papyrus sleeps until unrolled. When modern scholars finally listened again, they were not hearing a dead language, but a paused one. Champollion did not invent meaning. He recognized it. The scribes had done their work too well for it to vanish entirely. Tonight, as we sit among these quiet figures, we feel their patience, the steady hand, the trained eye, the belief that words matter enough to be shaped carefully and preserved faithfully. In the next part, we will drift into the sounds themselves, into how hieroglyphs spoke aloud, how consonants carried meaning, and how silence was filled by understanding rather than letters. For now, let the reed pen rest, let the ink dry, and let the house of life grow still around you. The night air is cooler now, and sound itself feels softer, as if the world is listening rather than speaking. This is the hour to drift into the voice of the language, into how these silent signs once moved through air and breath. Ancient Egyptian writing does not give us vowels. It leaves them open, like spaces between stars. To modern eyes this feels incomplete, but to Egyptian ears it was enough. Meaning lived in consonants, in rhythm, in context. Vowels were carried by memory, by habit, by the living tongue that once surrounded the written word like water round a boat. When a scribe read aloud, he did not struggle. He knew the words. He had heard them since childhood. The signs were reminders, anchors, not full instructions. This is why the script could afford to be ambiguous. Sound was already present in the world. Writing only had to point toward it. The Egyptians trusted shared knowledge. They trusted tradition. They trusted that meaning would be restored by the reader's breath. Hieroglyphs combined three kinds of signs: phonetic signs that represented sounds, logograms that represented whole words, and determinatives that guided interpretation without being spoken. This system was not inefficient. It was elegant. It allowed precision without rigidity. A single word could be spelled phonetically, reinforced by an image of what it meant, and clarified by a determinative at the end. Sound, image, and idea worked together, layered rather than competing. Consider the word for house. It could be written with the floor plan of a house, making the meaning instantly visible. But it could also be spelled with phonetic signs, followed by that same house determinative. The reader sees and hears at once. Writing becomes almost tactile. Royal names demonstrate this balance beautifully. Take the name Ramesses. It is written with the sun god Ra, a child's sign meaning born, and additional phonetic complements to guide pronunciation. The meaning is clear. Born of Ra. The sound is clear. The ideology is clear. Language does not hide belief. It presents it calmly, confidently. Foreign names posed a challenge. Egyptian writing was not designed for unfamiliar sounds, but scribes adapted. They approximated, using the closest consonants available. This flexibility is one reason the Rosetta Stone could be decoded. Greek names were spelled phonetically in hieroglyphs, revealing the sound values of signs. Ptolemy, Cleopatra. These foreign rulers unknowingly lent their voices to the resurrection of a lost language. The absence of vowels has long fascinated modern readers. Scholars reconstruct pronunciation using Coptic, comparative linguistics, and context. But exact sounds remain uncertain, and perhaps that uncertainty is fitting. The language returns to us as a whisper, not a shout. It does not demand precision. It invites listening. Spoken Egyptian likely flowed gently, with emphasis guided by rhythm rather than stress. We can glimpse this in poetry, where parallel lines echo each other, not in rhyme, but in balance. A phrase is repeated with slight variation, like waves touching the shore again and again. This repetition was not redundancy. It was reassurance. It allowed meaning to settle. In religious chants, sound carried power. Names of gods were spoken carefully. Some were avoided altogether, written but not said, out of respect or fear. Writing allowed containment. A dangerous name could be fixed in signs, controlled, prevented from roaming freely in sound. Silence itself became a form of meaning. Magic texts relied on exact pronunciation. A spell spoken incorrectly might fail. This made writing even more important. It preserved the intended sounds, even when speech drifted. The written word became a guardian of pronunciation, a memory stronger than the ear. As centuries passed, spoken Egyptian shifted significantly. New consonants softened. Old distinctions blurred. Writing resisted. This created a growing gap between sound and sign, but the scribes bridged it. With tradition, they learned the old forms as a separate skill, like learning to sing an ancient song whose language is no longer spoken at home. When Coptic emerged, written in Greek letters with a few added signs, vowels appeared clearly for the first time. The language felt suddenly exposed, audible again, through Coptic. Scholars hear echoes of earlier Egyptian speech. Words align. Roots reveal themselves. The old consonantal skeleton fills with flesh. And yet, even with this knowledge, something remains just out of reach. The exact cadence, the tone, the emotional color of everyday speech. That loss is gentle. It leaves space for imagination. It allows the language to remain dreamlike, perfectly suited to the quiet hours of night. In the next part, we will drift into the sacred texts themselves, into the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the book of going forth by day, listening to how language shaped the journey from life into eternity. For now, let the sounds fade back into silence. Let the consonants rest without vowels, and let the voice of ancient Egypt remain a soft murmur in the dark. The desert grows still in this hour, and the stars above it seem closer, as if leaning down to listen. This is the moment when language and eternity meet, when words were no longer written for the living ear, but for the long journey beyond breath. The sacred texts of ancient Egypt were never meant to be read quickly. They were meant to be absorbed slowly, like incense smoke curling upward, carrying meaning with patience. The earliest of these texts, the pyramid texts, were carved deep inside royal pyramids. During the Old Kingdom, they were hidden from the world of light, meant only for the king and the gods. No illustrations softened them, only lines of hieroglyphs cut cleanly into limestone, forming walls of language. These utterances were not stories, they were commands, invocations, transformations. The king does not die. He ascends. He becomes a star. He joins the circumpolar constellations that never set. Language makes this possible. To say it is to make it so. The pyramid texts speak in a voice both intimate and cosmic. They call to the sky. They address ladders, winds, birds, and fire. A single sentence may shift perspective without warning. Because identity in death was fluid, the king could be himself, a falcon, a god, and a star all at once. The hieroglyphs accommodate this easily. They do not insist on a single shape for the soul. As burial customs changed, the sacred language followed. The coffin texts appeared in the Middle Kingdom, written inside wooden coffins for nobles and officials. Eternity was no longer reserved for kings alone. The language adapts gently. Spells, once carved in stone, are now brushed in ink. The tone becomes slightly more personal. The deceased speaks in the first person. I know the names. I know the ways. Knowledge becomes the passport. To read is to survive. Here, the determinatives grow especially important. The same word might refer to a physical object or a spiritual concept, and the silent sign at the end tells the soul which path to follow. Writing becomes guidance, a map folded into language. The book of going forth by day emerges later, known to us as the Book of the Dead. It is not a single book, but a collection of spells chosen and arranged according to need and wealth. Some copies are lavish, with painted vignettes showing judgment scenes and fields of reeds. Others are modest, with only text. The language remains consistent, calm, repetitive, reassuring. One of the most famous passages is the negative confession, spoken before the scales of judgment. The deceased declares what he has not done. I have not stolen. I have not killed. The phrasing is simple, almost gentle. Morality is woven into language without threat. The hieroglyphs here are steady, balanced, as if order itself is being drawn into existence with each sign. Throughout these texts, names matter deeply. To know the name of a gatekeeper, a demon, a god is to neutralize danger. Names are written carefully, often with protective determinatives. Language is armor. There is no panic in these writings. Death is not chaos. It is a passage with rules, and rules can be learned. This calm acceptance flows through the language itself. Even the signs seem composed, aligned, patient, as temples continued into later periods. Sacred inscriptions became increasingly elaborate. The language grows dense, elusive, filled with archaic spellings. It speaks inwardly. To those trained to listen, outsiders see mystery. Insiders see continuity. When these texts finally fell silent, they did not disappear. They waited, and when modern eyes traced them again, slowly, respectfully, the calm returned with them. The language still does what it was designed to do. It steadies, it reassures, it orders the unseen. In the next part, we will drift into the playful side of the language, into puns, metaphors, and hidden jokes carved quietly into stone and papyrus. For now, let the scales of judgment rest level. Let the spells fold themselves closed, and let the soul pass onward in peace. The night leans inward now, softer, more forgiving. And this is the hour when even serious things allow themselves a quiet smile. The ancient Egyptian language, so often imagined as solemn and rigid, held within it a gentle playfulness that moved like a private current beneath the surface. The scribes knew this. They allowed it to slip into their work in small, careful ways, never loud. Never disruptive, but always present. Humor did not break order. It lived inside it. In the margins of papyri, where the formal text had ended and space remained, scribes sometimes let their thoughts wander. A cat stands upright. Herding geese, a mouse sits on a throne. These images mirror the verbal puns found in the language itself. Animals were chosen not only for their symbolic weight, but for their sounds. A duck might represent the sound saw, but also evoke clumsiness, appetite, domestic life. To write with animals was to invite double meanings, quiet jokes that only the trained eye would notice. Words themselves often carried layered meanings. The word for beauty could also suggest goodness. The word for heart meant both the physical organ and the seat of thought and emotion. When a love poem describes a heart wandering, it speaks both physically and emotionally at once. The hieroglyphs do not clarify which is intended. They allow both to exist together, trusting the reader to feel the balance. Metaphor blooms easily in this system. The lotus appears often in poetry and hymns. It opens each morning and closes at night. It becomes rebirth, youth, desire. To write lotus is to suggest renewal. Without explaining it, the reader supplies the rest. Even royal inscriptions sometimes carry subtle wit. A king boasts of defeating enemies, but the phrasing echoes earlier texts so closely that it becomes formulaic. The repetition itself borders on irony. The scribes knew this. They copied tradition faithfully, aware that tradition carried its own quiet humor. Puns appear most clearly in names. Many Egyptian names are sentences compressed into sound. Amenhotep means Amen is satisfied. Tutankhamun means the living image of Amen. These names are statements, prayers, identities. To speak them is to repeat theology casually, daily, without effort. There are also moments of sarcasm preserved in letters. A scribe complains about poor conditions, exaggerating his suffering with a dry tone that feels familiar across millennia. The language allows this because it is flexible. It does not insist on reverence at all times. Even in religious texts, wordplay appears. A god's epithet might echo another word, creating a resonance between power and action. These are not accidents. They are crafted affects designed to please both ear and mind. As the language aged, these playful elements became more obscure. When pronunciation shifted, puns faded, but traces remain in writing. A sign choice here, an unusual spelling there. They remind us that this language was used by people who laughed, teased, and enjoyed cleverness. Modern readers sometimes miss this because they approach hieroglyphs as puzzles, to be solved rather than voices to be heard. But when read slowly, with attention, the humor returns softly, like a remembered smile. This playfulness did not weaken the language. It strengthened it. It allowed it to hold the full range of human experience. Reverence and routine, fear and affection, eternity and everyday life. As the night continues, this gentler side settles comfortably among the heavier themes we have already touched. Language that can laugh is language that lives. In the next part, we will drift into the political power of writing, into propaganda carved in stone, erased names, and the deliberate shaping of memory through language. For now, let the cats step back into the margins. Let the jokes rest quietly between signs. And let the language breathe easily in the dark. The art turns heavier now, not with tension, but with gravity, the kind that settles into stone and remains there patiently. This is where language and power rest together, quietly reinforcing one another, never raising their voices, never needing to. In ancient Egypt, writing did not merely describe authority, it created it. To carve words into temple walls was to shape memory itself, to decide what would be remembered and what would slowly fade beneath sand and silence. Royal inscriptions move with a steady confidence. Victories are described as inevitable. Enemies are listed as countless, chaotic, already defeated. The language does not argue. It states, a king does not claim to be strong. He simply is. The hieroglyphs arrange this certainty visually. The king's name appears larger, central, often protected by cartouches. The enemies appear bound, kneeling, sometimes without names at all. To remove a name is to remove existence. Writing makes absence as powerful as presence. This control of memory is most visible in the practice of damnatio memoria. Though the Egyptians had no word for it, when a ruler fell from favor, his name could be chiseled out of monuments. The space left behind is not empty. It is deliberate. It tells future readers that something has been erased. That silence itself is part of the message. Hatshepsut's reign, long prosperous and stable, was later obscured by the removal of her names and images. The language did not protest. It obeyed the new order, yet traces remain. A faint outline of a cartouche, a grammatical structure that demands a royal subject even when the name is gone. The language resists complete erasure. It remembers patterns even when words are removed. Political power also shaped which language was used. Monumental inscriptions favored classical forms, even when spoken language had changed. This created a sense of timeless authority. A king aligned himself not only with gods, but with all kings before him. Writing flattened time. Past and present spoke the same way. Foreign rulers understood this instinctively. The Ptolemies, Greek by birth, adopted hieroglyphic inscriptions alongside Greek ones. Cleopatra's name appears in hieroglyphs, carefully spelled, respectfully framed. Language becomes legitimacy. To write oneself into the script of the land is to claim its history. The Rosetta Stone itself is a political object, a decree praising the king, issued in multiple scripts to reach multiple audiences. The language is formulaic, repetitive, deliberate. It reassures. It instructs. It aligns temple and throne. Even as it later unlocked the past, it was originally meant to reinforce the present. In temples, walls become texts, columns speak, doorways declare. The language surrounds the body as one moves through space. This is not accidental. Writing is. Architecture. To walk through a temple is to walk through sentences, to be addressed constantly by stone. Power also appears in what is not written. Failures are omitted, defeats softened. The language does not lie outright. It simply selects. Silence is its most subtle tool. For the people, this language of power was distant but familiar. They may not have read every sign, but they recognized the forms, the patterns. Writing did not need full comprehension to function. Its presence alone was authority. As dynasties ended and new rulers arrived, the language absorbed them quietly. Titles changed. Names shifted. The structure remained. Writing outlasted individuals. It waited patiently for the next hand to carve it. In this way, the lost language of ancient Egypt was never neutral. It was a participant in history, shaping how events were framed and remembered. Yet it did so calmly, without urgency. Stone does not rush. In the next part, we will drift into the slow fading of this language, into its final centuries, when signs were still carved but no longer fully understood, and mystery began to replace meaning. For now, let the chisel rest, let the walls hold their words, and let memory settle quietly into place. The night has reached a softer depth now, where even history seems to speak more quietly. And this is where the language begins its long, gentle fading. Not an ending, not a sudden loss, but a slow thinning, like a voice growing distant across water. The signs are still carved, the walls still speak, but fewer people truly understand what they are saying. Meaning lingers, but certainty loosens its grip. By the late Roman period, hieroglyphs had become ceremonial. They were copied with care, but often without full comprehension. Scribes memorized formulas, repeated patterns, trusted tradition. The language had shifted from living communication to inherited ritual. This did not trouble the Egyptians. Ritual did not require innovation. It required continuity. To repeat the old words was enough, even if their inner grammar had grown dim. In temples like Philae, inscriptions continued well into the 4th century. The signs are beautiful, elaborate, sometimes overly complex. Rare variants appear. Archaic spellings return. This is not decay. It is reverence. When meaning begins to slip, form is held more tightly. The language turns inward, speaking to itself, sustaining identity through repetition. Outside the temples, everyday life moved on. Greek dominated administration. Latin followed. Egyptian speech evolved into what we now call Coptic, written in Greek letters, spoken plainly. Prayed softly, the old signs remained behind stone walls. Separated from daily breath, a gap opened between sound and symbol that no longer closed naturally. Writers like Horapollo tried to explain hieroglyphs in late antiquity, but they misunderstood them. They believed the signs were purely symbolic, philosophical, mystical. Their interpretations were imaginative, poetic, and wrong, yet they influenced centuries of thought. Hieroglyphs became imagined as a language of secrets, not sounds. Mystery replaced literacy. This misunderstanding preserved the script in a strange way, because no one could read it. No one corrected it. It remained frozen, admired, misinterpreted, but untouched. The language slept beneath layers of assumption. Medieval travelers looked at the walls and guessed. Renaissance scholars speculated. Alchemists dreamed. The signs were copied into books as symbols of ancient wisdom. The language became a mirror for the desires of later ages. Each saw what it wished to see. Meanwhile, the true voice of Egyptians survived quietly in Coptic monasteries, sung in hymns, spoken in prayer. No one realized this was the key. The connection lay waiting, patient as stone. When modern scholars finally returned to Egypt with curiosity rather than fantasy, the language responded. Slowly, cautiously, Champlain's work did not break the silence violently. It eased it open. Each deciphered sign felt like a remembered word, not a discovery. Even now, the fading remains part of the story. We do not know everything. Some texts resist translation. Some meanings remain debated. This uncertainty is not failure. It is honesty. Languages are living things. When they sleep for too long, they do not wake completely unchanged. And yet, enough survives. Enough to hear the rhythm. Enough to feel the calm intention behind the signs. Enough to know that this language was never meant to be fully possessed. It was meant to endure, not to explain itself endlessly. As the night continues, the fading itself becomes part of the beauty. A reminder that not all meaning must be sharp to be real. In the next part, we will drift into the modern rediscovery, into the quiet work of decoding, comparing and listening, and how the lost language slowly returned to human understanding. For now, let the temple lights dim, let the final inscriptions settle into shadow, and let the language rest, not gone, only sleeping. The night carries us gently now into a different kind of silence, not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of careful listening. This is the age of rediscovery, when the world, restless and curious, finally learned how to sit quietly before stone and wait for it to speak. There was no thunder in this moment, no sudden awakening, only patience, comparison, and the slow humility of realizing that the past does not yield to force. When Europeans returned to Egypt in greater numbers during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, they brought notebooks instead of myths. They sketched walls carefully. They copied signs with steady hands. They stopped guessing and started counting. How often does this sign appear? Where does it repeat? What changes when a royal name is present? The language began to show patterns again, like footprints becoming visible as the light shifts. The Rosetta Stone stood quietly at the center of this effort. 3 scripts, 1 message. Greek provided the anchor. It spoke plainly of a decree, of priests, of honors granted to a king. The Demotic text revealed structure, repetition, economy, and the hieroglyphs, once thought purely symbolic, began to show restraint, order, and sound. The stone did not shout its secrets. It allowed them to be earned. Thomas Young approached the problem with careful logic. He noticed that certain groups of signs appeared inside cartouches and repeated where Greek names repeated. He suspected sound. This was a turning point, but not yet a full awakening. The language required intimacy, not just analysis. Jean-Francois Champollion brought that intimacy. His knowledge of Coptic allowed him to hear echoes where others saw only shapes. When he matched hieroglyphic signs to Coptic roots, the script softened. It became readable, familiar. The language did not resist him because he listened in its own voice. This rediscovery was not clean or immediate. There were debates, rivalries, pride, and error. Meanings were proposed, rejected, refined. But the overall movement was gentle. With each confirmed sign, the language regained a small piece of itself. Names came first, then titles, then grammar, then, slowly, poetry. As texts opened, they revealed not secrets, but lives. Accounts of work, prayers, letters, complaints. The dramatic mystery imagined for centuries gave way to something quieter and more human. The language did not contain hidden prophecies. It contained people scholars learned to respect. The script's flexibility. A sign could be sound or symbol, or both. Context mattered more than rigid rules. This required patience. Egyptology grew slowly because the language demanded it. Even today, translations remain provisional. Footnotes breathe quietly beneath the text. Scholars debate. Nuances without urgency. The language teaches modern readers how to read slowly, attentively, without forcing certainty where it does not belong. As more inscriptions were read, the sense of continuity deepened. The same phrases appeared across centuries. The same metaphors returned. The language revealed its long memory. It had not been waiting idly. It had been holding, This rediscovery did not end the story. It changed the relationship. The language was no longer lost, but it was not fully owned either. It remained partly distant, partly intimate, a voice from another rhythm of time. Tonight, as we listen to this moment of return, we feel the calm satisfaction of understanding without conquest. The past is not taken, it is received. In the next part, we will drift into what this language still means today, how it shapes our view of history, time, and meaning itself for now. Let the scholars lower their lamps, let the signs rest again in half-light, and let the language breathe quietly between worlds. The night now feels wide and unhurried, like an open desert plain beneath a pale sky. This is the hour when the past and the present sit together without tension, when the language we have followed so patiently no longer belongs only to ancient walls, but quietly shapes the way we understand time itself. The rediscovered words of Egypt do not rush into modern life. They settle, they linger, they remind. To read ancient Egyptian today is not to hear a foreign voice shouting across centuries. It is to sense a familiar calm, a way of seeing the world that values balance over drama, continuity over disruption. The language teaches this gently. It repeats ideas. It circles them. It does not demand novelty. It trusts that what is true will remain true even when spoken again and again. Modern scholars often speak of Mot, the principle of order, balance, and rightness that underpinned Egyptian thought. But Mot is not only an abstract idea. It lives inside the language itself, in the symmetry of inscriptions, in the pairing of phrases, in the careful placement of signs so that no side outweighs the other. Writing becomes a practice of balance, a visual and conceptual calm that reflects how the universe should be. This is why reading hieroglyphs feels different from reading modern scripts. It slows the mind. The eye moves deliberately. Meaning unfolds rather than appears. Even translations retain this quality. Egyptian texts often feel repetitive to modern readers, but this repetition is intentional. It reassures. It stabilizes. It is not meant to entertain. It is meant to endure. The language also reshapes how we view history. Instead of dramatic arcs and sudden collapses, Egyptian texts reveal a preference for continuity. Kings change, dynasties pass, but the language remains largely the same. This creates a sense of deep time, where centuries blur gently into one another. History becomes a slow river rather than a series of sharp turns. In this way, the lost language challenges modern impatience. It does not reward speed. It rewards attention. To truly understand a text, one must sit with it, compare versions, feel the weight of tradition behind each phrase. The language resists simplification. It prefers nuance. Even outside academic study, hieroglyphs continue to shape imagination. They appear in art, film, literature, often misunderstood, often romanticized. But beneath these modern uses lies a quiet respect. The signs still feel ancient, still feel meaningful. Their visual power has not faded. Museums display them behind glass, softly lit, inviting slow observation. Visitors lean closer, tracing outlines with their eyes, even when they cannot read a single sign. The language communicates without translation. It speaks through form, through balance, through patience. For those who do learn to read it, the reward is subtle, not revelation, but familiarity. The language stops being mysterious and becomes domestic. You begin to recognize common phrases, repeated metaphors, familiar turns of grammar. The ancient world feels less distant, not because it becomes modern, but because its humanity becomes clear. The lost language of ancient Egypt reminds us that writing is not only about recording information. It is about shaping how people think, remember, and rest within the world. It teaches that words can be slow, that meaning does not need urgency, that silence can coexist with expression. As we reach the end of this long night journey, the language feels no longer lost, but resting, available, yet reserved, open, yet dignified. It does not ask to be fully possessed. It asks only to be approached with calm. In the final part, we will close the circle gently, returning to the desert under moonlight, reflecting on everything this language has whispered to us, and letting it fade once more into quiet imagery and rest. For now, let the present moment soften. Let the signs hover faintly in the mind's eye, and let time itself feel slow and kind. The night has nearly completed its circle now, and everything feels slower, heavier, yet strangely lighter at the same time. This is the hour when thoughts drift without effort, when images rise gently and fade on their own. We return once more to the desert, not as explorers or scholars, but as quiet listeners, standing beneath a sky that has watched languages be born, spoken, forgotten, and remembered again. The lost language of ancient Egypt rests here, not trapped in stone, not confined to books, but spread thinly across time like a soft layer of sand. Imagine the Nile. At night, the water moves, but it does not hurry. It reflects stars that do not belong to it, yet accepts them without question. This is how the Egyptian language lived. It reflected gods, kings, farmers, lovers, and the dead. Without ever claiming ownership, it carried everything calmly. Hieroglyphs were never meant to shout truths. They were meant to hold them. When we look back across everything we have followed tonight, we see a language that trusted continuity more than invention. It changed, but slowly. It adapted, but carefully. Even its silence was deliberate. When speech faded, writing remained. When writing slept, echoes survived in prayer. When prayer changed, stone still waited. Nothing was wasted. The signs themselves feel almost tired now, not from age, but from having done their work too well. Birds no longer need to fly from wall to wall. Eyes no longer need to watch. Hands no longer need to give or take. They have already said what they needed to say. Their patience has outlasted empires. There is comfort in this. The idea that meaning does not have to be loud to survive. That a language can disappear from daily use and still remain whole. That forgetting does not always mean loss. Sometimes it means rest. The Egyptians believed deeply in cycles. The sun rose, set, and returned. The Nile flooded, receded, and flooded again. Life ended, but did not vanish. Language followed the same rhythm. It emerged, flourished, quieted, and returned when the world was ready to listen again. There is no tragedy in this story, only balance. As modern readers, we often approach the past with urgency. We want answers quickly. We want clarity. The Egyptian language resists this gently. It slows us down. It teaches us to sit with uncertainty, to accept that some sounds will never be fully recovered, some intentions never perfectly known, and that this is not failure. It is respect. Tonight, we have not solved a mystery. We have shared a long listening. We have allowed symbols to speak when they wished, and to remain silent when they chose. We have walked beside scribes, stood in temple shadows, traced signs that were never meant for haste. As this journey comes to rest, imagine the pyramids once more under moonlight. The stone is cool. The carvings are still. The language is there, complete. Whether or not it is being read, it does not depend on us. It never did. If you've stayed with this quiet journey, you're welcome to like and subscribe, and to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from and what time the night has reached there. These small connections echo the way language itself travels, softly, without demand. Now, let the hieroglyphs return to shadow. Let the Nile continue its slow movement. Let the desert hold its silence. We've unraveled this lost tongue tonight, not to wake it fully, but to understand how peacefully it sleeps. And as the final images fade, allow yourself to drift with them, steady, unhurried, and at rest.
As we stand in the present moment, the river of time keeps flowing forward. What lies ahead is not written in stone, but in the choice we make today. History has shown us that every ending is a new beginning. Every fall is followed by a rise. Let us look ahead with hope and wisdom to what the future might hold. The age of unity. In the coming years, the world may become even more connected. Borders between nations will feel less important. People from different lands will work together on big dreams, healing the earth, exploring space, and solving problems like hunger and sickness. Imagine a world where every child has a school, every family has clean water, and every person has a voice. This is not just a dream, it is a possibility. History has taught us that when human unity, great things happen. From the first fire to the first spaceship, progress comes from sharing knowledge and helping one another. The stars are calling once again after the moon. Human will reach Mars. As we stand in the present moment, the river of time keeps flowing forward. What lies ahead is not written in stone, but in the choice we make today. History has shown us that every ending is a new beginning. Every fall is followed by a rise. Let us look ahead with hope and wisdom to what the future might hold. The age of unity. In the coming years, the world may become even more connected. Borders between nations will feel less important. People from different lands will work together on big dreams, healing the earth, exploring space, and solving problems like hunger and sickness. Imagine a world where every child has a school, every family has clean water, and every person has a voice. This is not just a dream, it is a possibility. History has taught us that when human unity, great things happen. From the first fire to the first spaceship, progress comes from sharing knowledge and helping one another. The stars are calling once again after the moon. Human will reach Mars. As we stand in the present moment, the river of time keeps flowing forward. What lies ahead is not written in stone, but in the choice we make today. History has shown us that every ending is a new beginning. Every fall is followed by a rise. Let us look ahead with hope and wisdom to what the future might hold. The age of unity. In the coming years, the world may become even more connected. Borders between nations will feel less important. People from different lands will work together on big dreams, healing the earth, exploring space, and solving problems like hunger and sickness. Imagine a world where every child has a school, every family has clean water, and every person has a voice. This is not just a dream, it is a possibility. History has taught us that when human unity, great things happen. From the first fire to the first spaceship, progress comes from sharing knowledge and helping one another. The stars are calling once again after the moon. Human will reach Mars. As we stand in the present moment, the river of time keeps flowing forward. What lies ahead is not written in stone, but in the choice we make today. History has shown us that every ending is a new beginning. Every fall is followed by a rise. Let us look ahead with hope and wisdom to what the future might hold. The age of unity. In the coming years, the world may become even more connected. Borders between nations will feel less important. People from different lands will work together on big dreams, healing the earth, exploring space, and solving problems like hunger and sickness. Imagine a world where every child has a school, every family has clean water, and every person has a voice. This is not just a dream, it is a possibility. History has taught us that when human unity, great things happen. From the first fire to the fast spaceship progress comes from sharing knowledge and helping one another. The stars are calling once again after the moon. Human will reach Mars. As we stand in the present moment, the river of time keeps flowing forward. What lies ahead is not written in stone, but in the choice we make today. History has shown us that every ending is a new beginning. Every fall is followed by a rise. Let us look ahead with hope and wisdom to what the future might hold. The age of unity. In the coming years, the world may become even more connected. Borders between nations will feel less important. People from different lands will work together on big dreams, healing the earth, exploring space, and solving problems like hunger and sickness. Imagine a world where every child has a school, every family has clean water, and every person has a voice. This is not just a dream, it is a possibility. History has taught us that when human unity, great things happen. From the first fire to the first spaceship, progress comes from sharing knowledge and helping one another. The stars are calling once again after the moon. Human will reach Mars. As we stand in the present moment, the river of time keeps flowing forward. What lies ahead is not written in stone, but in the choice we make today. History has shown us that every ending is a new beginning. Every fall is followed by a rise. Let us look ahead with hope and wisdom to what the future might hold. The age of unity. In the coming years, the world may become even more connected. Borders between nations will feel less important. People from different lands will work together on big dreams, healing the earth, exploring space, and solving problems like hunger and sickness. Imagine a world where every child has a school, every family has clean water, and every person has a voice. This is not just a dream, it is a possibility. History has taught us that when human unity, great things happen. From the first fire to the first spaceship, progress comes from sharing knowledge and helping one another. The stars are calling once again after the moon. Human will reach Mars. As we stand in the present moment, the river of time keeps flowing forward. What lies ahead is not written in stone, but in the choice we make today. History has shown us that every ending is a new beginning. Every fall is followed by a rise. Let us look ahead with hope and wisdom to what the future might hold. The age of unity. In the coming years, the world may become even more connected. Borders between nations will feel less important. People from different lands will work together on big dreams, healing the earth, exploring space, and solving problems like hunger and sickness. Imagine a world where every child has a school, every family has clean water, and every person has a voice. This is not just a dream, it is a possibility. History has taught us that when human unity, great things happen. From the first fire to the first spaceship, progress comes from sharing knowledge and helping one another. The stars are calling once again after the moon. Human will reach Mars.